So you trashed your last project and started over, and then again, and then again. Is that because you just aren't meant to be an artist? Or is it simply because you're ambitious? So you spent your weekend sleeping instead of drawing. Is that lazy? Or is it healthy? Are you blocked or just solving the wrong problem? Is failure useful to you or destructive? Today on the Oatly Academy ArtCast, how to fail like a professional artist and find inspiration in the process. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Oatly Academy ArtCast. I'm Chris Oatly, director of the Oatly Academy of Visual Storytelling, and today the OA team and I have 5 failure flip tips to help you rethink failure and begin to appreciate it as a professional tool that's just as useful and just as fundamental as your favorite pencil. First, we'll hear from our podcast producer, Anya Marcos, about how the more ambitious you are, the more familiar failure becomes. Our tech director, Ejua Ebeneba, Edge to you and me, talks about how as artists we often mistake self-care for failure at the expense of our health. Content producer Sarah Mills talks about what to do when you're blocked by failure. Then content producer Micah Veenhoffen talks about how failure can actually build your confidence. And finally, I pose a challenge that I hope will help you become more proactive and maintain a more positive relationship to failure. Special thanks to Micah for hosting each interview, and to Sarah for knitting the adorable yarn turtle who appears on the album art for this episode. You can find that cute little yarn turtle and also links to each resource mentioned in this episode at chris.oatley.com/flip, FLIP. Friends, I am profoundly proud to announce that this year, 2018, marks the 10-year anniversary of the ArtCast. In celebration, we'll have multiple announcements about the future of the show, and more importantly, the community experience around the show. And of course, we'll look back and appreciate what the show has meant to us over the past decade. On a personal note, the ArtCast has been, and continues to be, the single most important and influential project of my entire career. The community around this show has completely changed my life, and therefore, the lives of everyone who feels a sense of belonging at the Oatly Academy. And if the ArtCast has a special place in your heart, please join us for the 10th anniversary ArtCast Community Celebration, where we'll geek out with sneak peeks at what's to come and collaborate to make the show better than ever. Before anybody else, you'll get to see our new album art and hear our new theme song. And you'll receive an invitation to our 10th birthday party, which will be held live online this fall. Sign up is fast and easy. Just visit chrisoatly.com/10, and that's 10 spelled out TEN. Enter your name and email address, and then click the link in the confirmation email. Again, please join the ArtCast 10th anniversary celebration at chrisoatly.com/10.
Failure is often perceived as this binary opposite of success, as if they were two extremes on the same scale. Now, you, Anya, have come to a different conclusion.
Failure actually paves the road to success. To give you an example, I've been working on my children's book. I started it quite recently. And I knew why I was making it. I knew what message I wanted to bring out with the story. I just didn't know exactly how to say it. Does that make sense? I didn't know what story would fit my message yet. I was just figuring it out. And by figuring it out, I mean just writing a lot.
Right.
I wrote a version of the story. I hated it. I wrote another version of the story. I really didn't like it. And I wrote again and again. The most interesting thing happened, though. I grew closer and closer and closer to what my story should look like. I grew closer to success. So not away from it, but closer.
We as artists are so often caught up in our thinking of, if I'm not able to produce the painting that I want to produce on the first go, then, unfortunately, we're starting to question whether or not we even should be an artist. So taking what you've learned from writing your children's book, what would you say to someone who's afraid of failing?
If you see failure as the steps in front of you to achieve that one goal you have to get you closer to what you perceive as success, all you need is start walking. They are part of your journey, not a distraction.
What's your failure flip tip from this story?
If failure brings you closer, isn't failure a good thing? It's as if failure is an opportunity to grow. And if failure is an opportunity to grow, what I really want to tell you is that you are not wasting time by failing. You're not disappointing anyone. You're just figuring things out. And figuring things out is part of the process to actually get something done. By embracing your failures, you can celebrate them. I wrote the first draft of my story. Yay! I'm not going to use anything about it, but yay, I failed. I started. I got something done.
Yeah, right. Edge, I know that you've been on this trajectory of realizing that to rest doesn't mean that you're failing.
This has been something that I've been dealing with for a really long time. I think it actually might have even gotten more apparent for me when I joined the Oatly Academy team, because everyone's such a hard worker.
Right.
In addition to that, there's this pervasive attitude, both in society and then the art community specifically, that if you're not on the go 100% of the time, right, if you're not hustling
right.
day in and day out, then you're not serious. You're not trying hard enough. You're not dedicated enough. Yeah, you're lazy. The problem is that the reality of my body is that it gets tired. And when I get tired, I just don't perform nearly as well as I can. This last year, I think it's become very, very apparent for me. It was a very topsy-turvy year, very up and down, very intense. And I just become hyper aware of the limits of my body. Mm-hmm. My reactions to things when I'm tired are just slowed down. I can't hold information in the same way that I do when I'm alert and awake. And coming to terms with that, realizing that I'm letting down my team if I'm allowing myself to break down because of this belief that resting is for the weak. That has become really, really apparent as the team has gotten closer together. We're doing more intense projects, and we're relying more and more on the coordination of the team to get things done. It's become really apparent how vital it is that I take care of my role in that.
Yeah, it's sort of your contribution to the success of the team if you make sure that you can give your best, and to rest, therefore, is investing in success.
Yes, exactly. It's the opposite of being a failure when you're doing something that allows you to perform at your peak. I've been reading a lot of articles on the modern day work week and just how destructive this has become. Research has been done that shows that when you go over the threshold, it's around 40 hours of focused work in a week. You're simply not performing at your peak anymore. Your body needs the time to regenerate itself. Your brain is a part of your body. And I feel like there's this weird attitude or subconscious belief that our brain is somehow separate from our body, or it's this entity powered by an external power source that has nothing to do with your level of fatigue and your level of energy, which is completely wrong. It just makes no sense to separate caring for your brain from caring from your body. As creatives, we're already fighting so hard against being put into this box of the lazy person who doesn't want to do real work. Mm-hmm. And in order to compensate for that perception that we're under in society, we end up overworking ourselves. in order to prove that, no, look, we're doing the work.
It's almost as if our work resembles so much what everyone did in kindergarten, drawing pictures and cutting something out and playing with glitter glue, that's sort of like, oh, because it looks like this, it must also be not work.
That's such a great point. In trying to work past this feeling that resting is failing, I've been trying to figure out where the source of that comes from, and I think that's probably a large part of it, which is that narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially when you combine work with passion, there's this idea that if you find something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I don't think that's the point. I think that the point is that the work that you do is meaningful, and therefore it doesn't feel oppressive to do. But that doesn't make it less difficult or draining.
So to rest is not the same as failing. What's your failure flip tip?
For me, the most important thing has been making a specific effort to note down the periods of time when you are most effective and what you're feeling like in those moments.
Yeah.
Like what's my energy level? What's my emotional state? And then noting what it takes you to get to those points. So what do I need in order to achieve this energy level? We're just talking about how you can maximize your impact at any point in time, whether you're under more stress or under less stress. And I think the most important key to that is knowing what that means for you, knowing what that looks like in terms of your body and your mind, and what things you're able to do to regenerate your body and your mind.
On the road to success, failure can feel like a point where we don't know how to continue. So we stop. Sarah, how do you move past these points of seeming failure?
I find points where it feels like a solid brick wall and find a different way around it. For example, I picked up knitting about 4 or 5 years ago, just as a hobby.
Awesome.
It's so much fun. And I've loved it ever since I started doing it, even though I wasn't very good. But a few months into doing it, I came across this beautiful knitting pattern for a shawl with like beadwork and like really pretty purple yarn, and it had lace in it. And it was just gorgeous. And so I downloaded the pattern and looked at these charts and the instructions, and it was like reading another language. I had like no idea, despite the fact that I had been spending the past several months, learning so much stuff relatively. I mean, it felt to me like I was learning at a pretty significant pace. And yet here comes this pattern that I loved and really wanted to do. And yet it felt like a total block in the road. So I found other ways to approach knitting. So the beadwork that was in it, I thought was really interesting. So I just looked up how to add beads to, like I was making little hats and scarves and things like that. So I tried adding beads to those. I had been knitting flat up until that point. So I tried circular needles. I looked up lace work and all these other things that I had no context for and didn't understand in the pattern initially. And so I'm actually working on that pattern now. And in retrospect, it is actually pretty simple.
Wow.
Now that I understand the individual components, I don't remember why it seemed so crazy to me. It feels like paint by numbers at this point. So yeah, I'm very proud of myself. If my goal was to complete that pattern specifically, I would have considered that a failure because I had no idea what it was trying to tell me. But instead, I just went around the problem by finding a new, easier problem. For example, I was helping my grandma move into a new cottage, and the biggest cabinet in the new kitchen couldn't open. The way the door folded meant that when you tried to open it, it was stopped by the corner of a stove that was too big for the space that it was in. So we had a whole bunch of pots and pans put in there. We had no more space. All of my relatives that were there were talking about yeah, we tried looking at moving the stove back in, but we can't move the stove back without messing with the wiring. We don't have an electrician and on. And then eventually I was just like, just take the door off.
Oh my God.
The point is not to get the door to open, and it's not to fix the stove, and it's not to fix the wiring. The point is just to pack her pots away. So instead of trying to tackle it from an electrician point of view, I was just like, well, I know how to use a screwdriver. let's get rid of the door entirely.
Yeah. Wow. What's your failure flip tip?
If the path to success is a straight road and failure is a brick wall in your way, just go around it.
So let's say I took this reference photo of a beautiful landscape. There's maybe a little bit of a forest, and we have a lake, and then we have this gorgeous sky with wonderful clouds in it. What would you tell me?
As artists, a lot of times we're encouraged to leave our comfort zones or try new things. And of course, that's all true. But I would suggest recontextualizing it into something that you're familiar with or familiar territory. So if you're someone like me who is really into draftsmanship and you're vexed by how to paint clouds or they look flat or something like that, I would start doing studies on the structure of clouds and how to, draw them in to where they look dimensional, but still pretty and fluffy. Or maybe if you're someone who thinks more in terms of how color and light works, you might look into how light filters through clouds or atmospheric perspective or other things like that. And sort of, if you already speak the language of color and light, then look at this image through that lens. And it will probably make a lot more sense than just trying to juggle clouds and reflections on water and big environments and trees and mountains and, on and on.
Micah, could you share with us your failure flip story?
Recently, I saw a call for a submission for a comics anthology, and I decided to apply. With only a few hours left until the deadline. And so now part of the submission was to write a synopsis for your story. And I'd never written a synopsis before. So I kind of winged that part. Needless to say, I did not get into the anthology. Whether that was due to my synopsis or not, I can't tell.
Right.
Fact is, I realized that I had no idea about how to write an enticing synopsis. So now I know I have to learn, and I want to learn how to write a synopsis. So this experience, failing to get into the comics anthology, reminded me of back when I was applying to get into graduate school, and I didn't get in. And so afterwards, just thinking through why I had applied in the first place, I realized that when you apply for something, whether it's a degree, an anthology project, a magazine, an internship, going through the application process will ultimately reveal something about yourself. And in particular, I think it'll reveal how you define success.
Right. So when you fail at something and someone else is the judge, whether you succeed or fail, the failure itself becomes a measurement of sorts, a signal that indicates whether you actually want to succeed by that person's standard or not.
Exactly. So, for example, with the master's degree program, they had an outline of what they were seeking in students and what the program was about. And so I had it in text, sort of what they were looking for and what they thought an ideal student would be. And at the beginning of the process, I thought I wanted these things. And so in hindsight, I can see where things that I said or didn't match their criteria, and I was fine with that. I could understand why those criteria mattered to them as the teachers or the school, but that was just not me, and that was not what I wanted to get out of my life and to get in terms of my artistic growth for the next 2 to 3 years. Now, with the comics anthology, with the project there, that's a different story. I want to match their criteria for success. Right. I want to be able to submit a synopsis of my story that reflects what I want the story to be about. So there I'm going like, yes, I failed their criteria, but I do want to learn how to write a synopsis.
Yeah, so in one situation, the process of failing taught you that you didn't care that much, and therefore you did not try again, and saved yourself time and pain and all kinds of trouble. But then in the second scenario with the comics anthology, you went through it, you failed, but then that failure was the complete opposite signal. It signaled to you what you need to improve, or most likely what you need to improve. And then in noticing that specific area for improvement, you didn't say to yourself, not worth it. You actually responded to that with ambition and said to yourself, okay, now I know what to work on and I'm going to try again. It's interesting hearing you say this because it's revealing to me what seems obvious now after hearing your story, that if we live under the fear of failure, then there's no clarity about anything.
Right.
Then we don't get any signals at all, because obviously we don't get the not worth it signal, nor do we get the, okay, that's what I need to work on. And, here's my plan to try again. And we miss out on all of that if we don't confront failure, if we don't risk it. So what would you say, Micah, is the action item? How can the listeners respond proactively to this failure flip story?
Take a leap of faith. Put yourself out there. Really respond to open calls for submissions for anthology projects, apply for internships, and apply for courses. Really risk failure, because whether you succeed or not, it will guide you. Chris, your failure flip tip comes from a recent podcast episode by Seth Godin.
Yes, and it's an amazing story. Before I tell it, I want to give a trigger warning. There's a dire circumstance that takes place in the story, and it might trigger some folks. It's not graphic, but it is dark. And so, just wanted to preface there. But the story comes from Seth Godin's podcast. It's a new podcast called Akimbo. In this episode called Placebos, Seth tells this story of a man who was part of an experiment, a double-blind experiment for an antidepressant. And there was a group that was getting the real antidepressant, and then there was a group that was getting a placebo. And both groups of people struggle with depression. So this guy was taking the placebo, just sugar pills. There's no medication at all. And one day he's feeling extremely depressed, and he attempts suicide by way of overdosing on the placebo. And it almost works. He's rushed to the hospital. His condition is severe, and several doctors have to convince him that he did not, in fact, overdose on pills, and only then did his condition stabilize. It was all in his head.
Yeah.
The whole thing was in his head. And because he believed so completely that he was taking toxic doses of a medication, his body was responding as if he had. And so, I see artists doing the creative version of that all the time. I see this all the time. And I hear from artists who write me and reach out to me on social media. There is a failure or the threat of failure that sends them into this downward spiral, and they ruin their own creative life because they think that failing in their artistic growth journey somehow invalidates their very existence. And it just breaks my heart.
So these negative thoughts are to the artist what the placebo was to this man taking part in the experiment, with the same real world consequences.
Exactly. The way I have been phrasing it is, be careful that you don't connect failure to your self-worth, because if you do, you might be committing artistic suicide. One example that comes back over and over and over again is this artist's meme that's been going around. Now, the meme, as I understand, is sort of a remix of a tweet that was posted by our good friend Kazu Kibuishi a couple years ago. I'm not sure exactly when it was. As best I can tell, this tweet went viral and then it sparked all of these other remixes. But Kazu's tweet was sort of a confession, and it was tongue-in-cheek and therefore kind of funny and heartwarming. And the important thing to keep in mind about Kazu's tweet is that he is just saying, here's something that I have been struggling with. So it's one artist to a group of artists sort of sharing some vulnerability. And Kazu's tweet says, creative process, : 1, this is going to be awesome. 2, this is hard. 3, this is terrible. 4, I'm terrible. 5, hey, not bad. 6, that was awesome. And probably everybody listening to this has experienced this, at some point. So again, Kazu's tweet, a confession, a vulnerability, a self-disclosure, that can be a unifying thing. Hey gang, here's how I'm feeling today.
Right? Kazu sharing that on that day might have been a recent experience of his, but he might tell you the next day or the following week that he had a really good week and that today his process is very different.
Yeah, exactly. The remixed versions of this tweet have lost the essence of Kazu's original meaning, and they have started to turn into this prescription for artists. And by prescription, I mean that instead of posting it and saying, yeah, me too, anyone else feel this way, let's do something about it, something healthy, they say things like, get used to it, it's just part of the job, it's our lot in life, welcome to being an artist, it's just the way it is.
And then to sort of turn that into the template almost that requires you to hate yourself is really dangerous.
Yeah, that's where it mutates from honest to insidious. It's one thing to express solidarity or proactivity or encouragement even. It's a whole other thing to go, hey, this is the creative process, artists. This is just how it is. For everybody all the time. 1, because it's just not true. And 2, just because it's common doesn't mean it should be common. It doesn't mean it has to be common, even if it has been in the past, right? We have to be careful. But we're not being careful. It gets worse with every new mutation. The other day, I saw for the 3rd or 4th time one of the alternate versions of Kazu's tweet come across my Facebook feed, and it says, creative process. 1, this is awesome. 2, this is tricky. 3, this is shit. 4, I am shit. 5, this might be okay. 6, this is awesome. Even if the work legitimately is terrible, even if it's a complete failure, we have to be careful about what we say about ourselves. We have to be careful about what we believe about ourselves. If you accept this as your template for the creative process, even subconsciously, if you internalize it, then you're creating a negative placebo effect every time you do something creative, because that's just the process. Remember the placebo guy. You know, you have to respect the power that your own belief has over your physical body and has, of course, over your creative spirit. Upon learning that, like you, another artist struggles with equating their sense of self-worth and their sense of failure, don't take that commonality as a signal of inevitable doom. And certainly don't conspire to condemn everybody that follows you on social media to the same fate. No, find solidarity, make a new plan, be proactive, change the conversation. Now, I am not saying that we should all just think we're great and never confront our failures, never confront our weaknesses, and just believe that we're the best artists on the planet and just go along in this, delusion. No, I'm not saying that at all. Anyone who knows me, all my students, know that that is quite the opposite of what I believe. You cannot compete as a creative professional. You cannot create a sustainable creative career without sober self-assessment. But you won't get there either if you're constantly punishing yourself. Even if you did, it would suck. It would completely suck. You'd just be miserable all the time. What I'm saying is, let's bring accuracy and precision and clarity and intent and respect to failure. Let's keep failure in its place. Just like you were talking about, let's maintain failure as a useful tool and disconnect failure from your self-worth, failure from the validity of your choice to try to grow as an artist.
I'd really like to hear your failure flip tip again.
Sure. Be careful that you don't connect failure to your self-worth. If you do, you might be committing artistic suicide. Pretty intense, but important to acknowledge, I think.
What advice would you give our listeners? What specific action can they take?
Well, my recommendation is to take on a challenge of some sort, enroll in a course, start working through the exercises in a drawing book. What's the drawing book that you love, Micah, that has the great exercises?
Oh, Harding's Lessons on Drawing.
Yeah, that is a great book, right? That's got fantastic drawing exercises. Holy moly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, start working through those exercises or start a new project, a 30-day challenge or something like that. Anyway, whatever it is, pick a challenge where you know you will fail and fail often. Pick a challenge where you don't consider it a success until you have failed. Okay, got that? You will not consider it a success until you've failed, right? The point is to fail. When we begin a new challenge in our artistic growth journey, and we approach this with the expectation to fail, not the expectation that we will feel worthless, not the expectation that we will feel like shit, right? No, with the expectation to fail and have it inform our growth journey, that we will use that failure To clarify, to guide our growth journey, we will begin to break that mental cycle. Start with the expectation to fail. Consider failure and multiple failures necessary ingredients in the recipe for success within the context of that challenge. Whose failure flip tip resonated with you most strongly, and why? Tell us in the comments section at chrisoatley.com/flip. Again, that's chrisoatley.com, chrisoatley.com/flip, FLIP. There you'll also find links to the resources we shared in this episode, and if you love the ArtCast, please join us for the 10th anniversary celebration at chrisoatley.com/10, that's 10 spelled out, TEN, and we'll be in touch via email. Until next time, my friends, stay strong and stay close.